Found
And
it?
he said, I saw it. I just drove by it. He says it was even standing on end.
Sure. Well, I want to welcome everybody here today. This is a third in a series of lectures we're having on Buddhism here at the Jefferson City Library. And as you've probably read in the flyers that we had, this is about the continuum. But it's also about what we call the three marks of existence, or the three Dharma seals. And those three Dharma seals, or three marks of existence, are the doctrine of impermanence, the doctrine of suffering, and the doctrine of not self. And these three Dharma seals function together and are kind of interwoven with each other. And in addition, the continuum, or avanga, is the ancient Indian word, are also kind of interwoven. I should probably point out, now that I've brought that up, there's two Buddhist languages that are used, and of course you probably heard of this one, Sanskrit, and the one that we usually lean on in our tradition is Pali. And basically, Sanskrit was the language of the Brahmins, and Pali was the language of the common people. The Buddha's native tongue was a form of Pali called Madgali. And although basically he orally taught his teachings in the language of Pali or in Madgali, he understood Sanskrit, having been a nobleman. And Sanskrit was a written language before Pali was a written language. So a lot of the very, very early Buddhist texts, both of the Theravada, or School of the Elders, and the Mahayana, the higher vehicle, both of the very, very early texts were written in Sanskrit. And we'll discuss those terms when they pop up. But the first mark of existence is impermanence, anicca in Pali, anitya in Sanskrit. And all conditioned things are impermanent. Our youth is impermanent. You know, I used to be 19. Now I'm pushing 60. And, you know, I used to have good blood pressure, used to be able to see well, used to be thin. Now I can't see so good. I have to wear glasses. Blood pressure moves around all over the place, and I'm fat. So that's kind of what happens as you get older. You know, it's the same thing if you have a car. You know, you get a new car, and it's so nice, and then all of a sudden, 10 years later, you know, you feel like driving it off a cliff. So you can really see that in anything that you purchase, anything that you own. When you get it new, it sure is nice, but after a while, it's a piece of junk. But everything is impermanent. Everything around us, trees, rocks, mountains, cities, nations, planets, stars, the universe, everything is impermanent. All the people running around in the world today taking care of their business, they're all impermanent. And in 100 years, they'll all be dead, and there'll be a whole new generation of people. And they'll also be impermanent. And the whole human race is impermanent. One day we'll go extinct. So all conditioned things are impermanent. Human beings are conditioned phenomena, just like any tangible object. A piece of chalk, a statue, or a car. All those things are impermanent. So that's the first mark of existence. Now the second mark of existence, or the second Dharma seal, is a teaching of suffering. And this is where it gets a little bit complicated. The Buddha spoke of four noble truths. Now the first noble truth is suffering exists. I mean, we all know that. Anybody that's ever stubbed their toe knows that suffering exists. And the second noble truth is suffering has a cause. You know, there's a reason that all this suffering, or dukkha, is the Pali Sanskrit word. occurs, and of course it has a cure. And the fourth noble truth is the method to bring about that cure of suffering, and it's called the Noble Eightfold Path, displayed here in the Dharma wheel. And this concept of the Four Noble Truths came from the Vedic medical tradition. And the Buddha used it to try to get the foundation of his teachings across about dukkha. Now, in the medical tradition, the first thing that you would want to do in the Vedic medical tradition was the doctor would say, okay, well, is there really a problem here? Is this person just faking it, and are they really sick? You know, is it psychosomatic? So the first thing to establish is that there's a sickness. And what is the cause of the sickness? Okay, did this person eat bad food? Did this person get bitten by a mosquito? You know, what caused the sickness? Then the Vedic doctor would say, okay, and the third step now is there's got to be a cure for this. Everything has its opposite. Every cause has its effect, you know, a yin-yang. So there has to be a way to cure it. And then, of course, the fourth step would be the cure. Oh, this is what will get rid of, you know, the ptomaine or, you know, the mosquito bite. So the Buddha used that formula to explain the Four Noble Truths. So the first noble truth, suffering exists. I should also point out that the word dukkha, and I'll write that on the board, and it means the same, it's the same thing in Pali or Sanskrit. D-U-K-K-H-A. Penmanship isn't my forte. Dukkha can be translated as, of course, suffering, is basically the way it's translated into English. It has some other meanings. Unsatisfactory conditions is another one. Unfulfilled wishes, tension, stress. But this kind of suffering is inherent in life. The Buddha pointed out that birth is suffering, aging is suffering, death is suffering, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair, he said, are all suffering. Associating with unpleasant things or unpleasant people is suffering. Being separated from who or what you love is suffering. Of course, not getting what you want is suffering. Your body, your feelings, your perceptions, your thoughts, your consciousness are all subject to suffering. And these five things are called the five clinging aggregates of suffering. The Buddha said to have a body is to suffer. The body gets sick, it gets old, and it dies, and is interconnected with our mental emotional suffering. You know, we're a psychophysical creature. All of these things are all tied together. The second noble truth is suffering has a cause. Okay, and that cause is craving. We're always craving for things to be other than what they are. And if we do achieve having something other than what it is, then all of a sudden we're going to find a problem with that as well. So that's just kind of our inherent fickleness in life. And that process goes on continually, from running away from pain and chasing after pleasure. But there's a cure for this suffering. That's the third noble truth. And that cure, the Buddha said, is the Noble Eightfold Path. And if you take a look at the handout or look up here, you'll see what we have in relation to the Eightfold Noble Path. Right understanding, right thoughts, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. We put that into motion, and we can make suffering in life cease. And it might sound a little bit over simplistic, but let's take a look at this for a moment. Let me erase this. And I'm going to write three things, and I'll put them in English. Morality, let's call this mental development. It can also be spiritual development. And last but not least, wisdom. So, if we look at morality in relation to grouping things on this Dharma wheel, it's right, speech, right action, and right livelihood. So right speech, right action, and right livelihood. And if we look here, these are all volitional things that we can do. If we say something to somebody that's unfair or unethical, or we do something to someone, that takes it a step further. And those things cause what we call bad karma. Right livelihood. If you have a livelihood where you're a nurse or a doctor or anything that's kind of an ethical thing to do to earn your living, that's right livelihood. Now, in the Buddhist tradition, things that are not so good a livelihood are things like slavery, dealing in slaves, dealing in poisons, dealing in weapons, dealing in meat. Those things are bad livelihood, and it comes back on us with the law of causality. And the kind of karma that the Buddha was concerned with was intentional karma. There's other kinds of karma that are just out there. You're walking down the street and a flower pot falls on your head. You didn't do anything to cause that, but it's just something, you just happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. So we want to try to develop morality, and that's how these three are grouped together: right speech, right action, right livelihood. Mental development. Right effort. Right mindfulness. And right concentration. And basically, this has to do with meditation or developing yourself mentally. And meditation is a good way to do that. It's not the only way. I've got a friend, an online friend that I argue with a lot about meditation. He doesn't think that meditation is really all that Buddhist. His opinion is you should just take that out into your life and live your right effort, live your mindfulness, being aware of what you're doing when you're doing it, and concentrating on what you're doing. And that's a little easier said than done, I think. At least for me, I need the meditation. You have to think about meditation as, a pianist playing scales, and studying the music. And then he gets out on the stage at night and performs, well, he's ready to do it. And the same thing with meditation, in my opinion. You take what you learn on the cushion or on the chair off of the cushion, and you take it out into daily life, and you're prepared for daily life. So, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. They'll keep you out of trouble, basically. And from that comes wisdom. Under wisdom, we have right, understanding, and right thoughts. Now, the word is piña. I may as well write that here because I'm going to have to discuss that. I want to try to keep away from these as much as possible. Looks like pana, but it's pronounced piña. And it means wisdom. It means enlightenment, kind of, in a way. And this is what develops out of practicing your morality and practicing your mental development. And I also want to point out that later on we'll talk about what forms karma, what our karma formers are. And I'll write that up now. Was anybody writing this down? Shall I leave it? Can I erase it? Okay. Only so much blackboard. When we get into this other wheel, which is not quite so user-friendly, which is the wheel of samsara, and we'll get to that. We're going to talk about karmic formations. And you'll see it there's a second spoke in the wheel of samsara. And those things are thoughts, speech, and action. Oh, come on here. Let's make a nice C. And our karmic formations are what keeps us in the wheel of samsara, or the wheel of life, sometimes referred to as the wheel of suffering. Take the freeway. When you're out on the freeway, first thought is, this guy in front of me is driving too slow, he's an idiot. So you think that. Okay, and you're forming some karma there. Not as much as you would with speech, but after you roll down the window and yell, hey you, learn how to drive, etc. Well, you've taken that karma to the next level. Then you get real mad and you say, I'm going to run him off the road. If you really, really want to make some bad karma, you do some kind of an action. Or you throw your Coke at him or something. And that's how we form karma. And that's how we keep our, usually not quite that intensely, but that's how we get ourselves into the wheel of samsara. And sometimes it's called the wheel of rebirth. We're on this treadmill just going round and around and around and around in a circle. So, I think in your handout we've got the third page, I think, is the wheel of samsara. And you'll notice the very first one is ignorance. And of course, ignorance is the opposite of right understanding. And the traditional way to look at this is to see it over 3 lifetimes. You see past, present, and future, and looking at it like that, it's the past life, the present life, and the future life. Above that, you'll see where it says active side of life with 1 and 2, and active side of life right across with, I believe it's 8, 9, and 10. Now that active side is active. It's just what it sounds like. It's things basically that we do to ourselves Well, the passive things are the things basically that get done to us. But the interesting thing is that we have somewhat of a control over both. Obviously more so with the active sides of life. So, in relation to just our daily life, this thing can spin instantaneously in everything that we do, like deciding we got to go out and get a cup of coffee. The first thing that happens is you have this ignorance. I need a cup of coffee, and obviously you don't need a cup of coffee. You want a cup of coffee, and so you have the thought, the words you tell people around. I'm going out for coffee, and the action you start going out for coffee, and it goes into this rebirth consciousness. Is also called the conditioned consciousness. I think that's down on your chart, and the conditioned consciousness is you're conditioning yourself. And some mental and physical phenomena are starting to take place. You're starting to have a feeling of tasting the coffee, even though you haven't quite gotten there yet. And it continues on. To make a long story short, you get the feeling, you get the craving, you get the attachment and becoming. The waitress is handing you your coffee, and then there's kind of a birth, a jati that goes on. You start drinking your coffee. And of course, as human beings usually do, you don't just have one coffee, you have 5. And then all of a sudden what happens? You start having sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair. Oh God, why did I drink so much coffee? So you have a few glasses of water, and you start to feel better. And then the ignorance kicks in, and you're ready for another cup of coffee. And the process continues. So this is spread out across 3 lifetimes in one sense, and in every single thing we do in another sense. There's a Japanese Buddhist word for this. They call it, if I remember right, Ichinen Sanzen. And Ichinen Sanzen means 3,000 thought possibilities within a momentary existence of life. So this thing can just spin at the speed of light, and it kicks us around all over the place, all day long. But anyway, it's kind of hard to get a visceral understanding of this. One time, the Buddha's cousin said to him, you said that this is difficult to understand, but to me it's very obvious. And he said, no, don't think like that, Ananda. It's interwoven in everything you do, everything you think, everything you eat, everything you pick up. The dependent originations are woven right into it. Dependent originations, in a nutshell, in one of the Buddhist texts, it says, "Imisman sati adinam hoti, amisman asati adidam nahoti." Means this is like this because that is like that. When this is not like this, then that is not like that. Pretty simple, but it's kind of difficult to get a handle on that a lot of times. So anyway, moving right along, the third mark of existence is not self, and this is usually the one that people have the most trouble with. The Buddhist doctrine of not self. Just for funsies, I'll write down the Pali words because you may have heard the Sanskrit word. Sanskrit is there's a term Atman. Which means soul. And, well, let's do it this way. If you put the an Atman, that means not soul, not self. Let's see. Let's do it this way. Anatta. These words mean the same thing. They mean not self. So the soul theory is an alien concept in the Buddhist tradition, but it does have its rough equivalent, which is called santati, S-A-N-T-A-T-I, santati. And it's not a specific identity, but rather the sum total of an individuated uncertainty that continually manifests from existence to existence. In other words, what we were and what we will be never stays the same. The Buddha, when he was sitting under the banyan tree, he was starting to attain enlightenment. He started to remember his past existences. We talked a little bit about this at the church today. He all of a sudden remembered his previous life, his previous existence. Then he remembered the one before that, and the one before that, and the one before that. Then he remembered 1,000. Then he remembered several thousand. He remembered an incarnation he had as a deer, and he remembered an incarnation that he had once as a tree. And we have all of that inside of us, and it's called bhavanga. We'll get to the bhavanga in a minute, which is continuum. And we can kind of see from this example that there isn't a permanently abiding self. And in the teaching called the Anatta Lakkhana Sutra, or the Doctrine of Not Self teaching, the Buddha says to his first 5 disciples, the body is not a permanently abiding self. If the body was a permanently abiding self, this body would not be subject to suffering. And one could say, let my body be this way, or let my body be like that. If it was something permanent, you could do anything you wanted to it. You could make it young or old at will. We could make it fly. And he said the same was true with our feelings, our perceptions, our thoughts, and our consciousness. We talked about this today as well. My master, Venerable Chaochu, liked to use the word recycle instead of rebirth. When you think about it like that, it's kind of an indisputable fact. When you die, your body dissolves. 75% of it is made up of water, and that 75% of your body escapes into the atmosphere. The rest of it, the hard parts, dissolve into the ground, and it can become part of a tree, or it can be clumped up in a mineral deposit and be part of a rock, or calcify. And it isn't really that difficult, when you think about it in those terms, to think of your mental factors, your feelings, your perceptions, your thoughts, and your consciousness also being something that can recycle. If everything came from the Big Bang and we're all made out of stardust, that means even that energy between brain cells, even that's something that's not permanent, but on the other hand, it is permanent. And that's kind of the paradox. One of my favorite examples with that is we can see things the way they work in our physical realm. But if I have $1 and you have $1, and I give you my $1 and you give me your $1, we still each have $1. But on the other hand, if I have an idea and you have an idea, and you give me your idea and I give you my idea, we have 2 ideas. So those things don't function quite the same. And it is a little bit of a paradox that these different realms function in these different ways. If there's that much difference between the physical and mental realm, if there is a spiritual realm, just think of the difference it must be from the mental realm and the spiritual realm. So anyway, in summary, I want to say that the 3 Dharma seals, or the 3 marts of existence, are interwoven into each other. Things never remain the same. All those things we love will eventually die or leave. Children grow up.